What's going on, everybody? I put this video together to show how I put together these fence panels. In this video, I'll go from start to finish, and along the way, I'll explain certain things that I do, tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. If you guys have any suggestions or any thoughts, put them down in the comments. And if you like what you're seeing, like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it helps with recommendations on YouTube. Thanks for watching. This was very tedious to set up, to weld, but I'm telling you, it saves so much time. You could just set up your rails, grab your pickets, drop them in place, and then you're ready to weld. And I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. Now, how to set up the jig with the material that we're working with, and how to center your pickets on your rails. What we are working with is 1.5 inch wide rails, 3/4 inch pickets. Now, how do we center it? So what we do is we take 1.5 inches, we subtract the width of our picket, which is 3/4 inch, and we're left with 3/4 inch. So what is half of 3/4 inch? That's 3/8. So I got one of these little squares, set it up to 3/8 from the outside, and as you'll see, once it's centered, you'll have 3/8 on this side and 3/8 on that side. So now we're perfectly centered. Now what we could do at this point is you could just set your rails on the table, put some 3/8 inch spacers, set that up, and you're ready to weld. And our spacing would be just right. But I decided to go with 3/4 inch underneath because it's bigger material, can weld to it a lot easier, and also you'll learn if you do it the other way, the jig on the outside that you use to square it up, if you run it all the way to the bottom here, it's a pain in the ass to try to pry that whole thing out of there. With this, you're elevated 3/4 inch, it helps you pull it out, just works better. So since we're raising 3/4 inch, now that actually puts us right at 1.5 inches, because we got 3/4 inch and 3/4 inch. So remember, our difference that we needed to do was 3/8 inch. So by elevating our rails 3/8 inch, that puts us back where we need to be to center the pickets. So basically, you just got to figure out your math, and if you're going to be using 1.5 inches and 3/4 inch, then that's what you need to do. Those are your numbers that you need to remember. I'm going to go ahead and set up the jig really quick, and doing it like this, it takes less than 5 minutes. I mean, maybe even 2 to 3 minutes just to set it up, and then you're ready to weld. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up so you guys can see. As you can see, when I'm finished with one panel, I slide it right off the table, and then I begin to set up the next panel. I drop down my first rail, drop down all the pickets into their slots, put the other rail on top, make sure everything's lined up, and having the jig, I make sure everything's squared up, then I clamp it all down to the work table. Next thing you want to do is weld it up. Now as you can see, I weld all 4 corners first because you want to distribute the heat. Then I break the panel up into 4 sections and I divide it up so I'm not building up too much heat in one section of the panel. If you were to start welding on one side and go all the way across, one of your rails is going to bow. Trust me, I know, I've done it in the past. So just take your time and distribute the heat and make sure you have good quality welds so it holds it all together. Next, what we're doing here is I'm going to lift it off the jig, I'm going to slide it down, and having my jig allows me to slide everything down and everything stays lined up. I then put down the top rail, which is the third rail, and I drop all my smaller pieces in between the second and third rail. I make sure everything is lined up. I'll check it for square to make sure it's square. Once that's done, I'll clamp it all down to the work table, and then from there I can start welding and move on to the next step. Let me show you what we're looking at here. The reason why down near the bottom I just have one piece, and that's just to keep it straight in line up towards the top of the panel. I could have did the same, but I ended up running two pieces because it made it easier when you have these short pieces in here. They won't move on you. If you just had one of these here, this piece here will move on you and it'll get out of whack. At least here we're pretty much lined up, and it looks like it's going right through the rail. So next thing we got to do is weld it up, and then we'll do the top piece. We're going to be working on this top section next, which is this piece here and the finials. And we got a staggered look, so there's two different sizes. So as you saw in the last video, I ran this through my jig. Makes it a lot easier to weld. It holds these small pieces in place, and it lines them up really nice. So it looks like it's actually going through the metal. Okay, the last part is the top pieces and the finials. Now, I've done this a few different ways. The best way that works for me is just doing them by eyeballing them. It's a lot faster, and you can get them to look real nice. I've been doing this a while, so you may need a little bit of practice to get that done, to get it accomplished. But if you watched my first part of this video, you'll understand why I have a 3/4 inch spacing down here, and then I got my rails raised up 3/8 of an inch. So out here on the outside, we can do the same thing. We've got some 3/4 inch stock that we're going to set up to put our pieces on. And like I said, I'm just going to eyeball them. It's a lot faster, and you can get it to look pretty good. All right. And by putting those on those 3/4 inch pieces, it's going to give us the spacing that we want to center it up. See that? That 3/8 of an inch. So that way we know. Now the trick to this is to just take your time and try to line them up as good as you can. As you can see how fast that was. It's a lot faster than having to lift this thing out, slide the whole jig over, set it down, and then line these up in here. It works great and it lines them up, but like I said, If you could do them by hand. Look at that. And if you do weld one on a little crooked, right now that it's hot, you can slam this thing with a hammer and you can kind of straighten it out a little bit. What I like to do is I'll weld these two sides. I'll do that all the way across. I'll put on my finials, let it cool, and then when I'm all done, I'll weld all the tops, go all the way across. And then I don't know if you've seen my previous video or not, but I stand them up on their side, and that's how I weld the back side. But I'm gonna go ahead and put this on time lapse so you can see me put all these in, and then I'll weld all the finials on there as well. Okay, I got all those top pieces welded on. So the next thing that we have to do is put our finials on. Now, when you're cutting on the chop saw and you're cutting a lot of these, when you build up heat, I've explained this in another video, on that chop saw blade, you're gonna get these nasty burrs. And when you try to put your finials on, it's just not gonna wanna go on. See that? Because of that. So what I do is get a hammer and I'll hit all those burrs in. And here's where, like, if you got a crooked one, you can hit it with a hammer and it'll actually move a little bit. Let's check them out. These all look good. Alright, this is the one that it wouldn't go on. Let's see, look at that. So look at all that material that we had to, see if I can get it to focus here. Had to hit down, but now it'll go right on. The way I weld these on is just by eyeballing it. Like I said, I've seen other guys build a jig, you know, set this in the jig, put the piece of metal in there, weld it, and then weld this whole piece on. Well, that takes a lot of time when you're doing a lot of these. That's very tedious and can take a lot of time. Now, as you can see, they're not all going to sit the same either. These things are cast iron, so they're not going to be perfect. You're going to get a lot of play in these. Look at that. So you're going to have to, or what I do is I kind of just stand over it and I look at it and I'll center it up with the picket, how I think it looks nice and straight, like right there. And then I'll weld one whole side here. And then I'll back up to the next one. This one's really bad. Look at all that play. So I'll just center it up by hand, eyeballing it right there, and I'll weld. And sometimes you're going to get some that are just really bad. And this one I can tell by looking at it, it's pointing down. Flip it over. It's a little bit, it's pointing up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but it's actually going up. Look how far down this one is. So you just got to do them by eyeballing them. So I'll go ahead and start welding these. There's another finished panel. And the way you check to see if your finials are nice and lined up, look at it from the side. And then once you get right here, if they all disappear, you know you did a pretty good job. Looks good to me. Well, that's it. Showed you a few of my tricks and tips. If you got any questions or comments, let me know down below.